Good afternoon, everybody. So who's at their first conference in about 2 years? Most of you. All right, there we go. We're all social distancing, I see, so we can get started. My name's Fersht. I'm the CEO of an analyst company, HFS. I've had 25 years in the analyst and consulting industry with IDC, Gartner, and Deloitte Consulting. And joining me in today's session is Kevin Campbell.
And I'm the CEO of Syniti, a data management company. We work with Global 2000 in order to help them get the most out of their data.
Excellent. And how many of you are professionals working with complex data sets to achieve your outcomes and goals in life? Pretty much all of you. Okay, anyone here who sells data solutions, or you're all consumers of data? Okay, that's good to know. Brilliant. So to start with, we can take a 20, even a 30-year look back at the history of the industry we've come from, and you can see here, a lot of things happened around the turn of the century. We saw the boom in outsourcing and offshoring. We saw the impact of digital that sort of hit the world around 2010. This evolved to what we call today something called the One Office, which is a much more data-driven ecosystem, where this is about how can you really inspire your employees to understand how to impact their customers more effectively, build more end-to-end process. And we spent a lot of time in the last decade, I call it the pontification era, where we visualize what good looked like, and now we're actually trying to get there. So there was a huge change, obviously, with the pandemic, and for the first time, many businesses were forced to actually make real changes to their business models and their processes. How do we operate in a virtual environment? How do we get data from our customers to our employees? How do we understand our supply chains more effectively? So for many businesses, this was the first time they had to truly make changes, because all we've ever done in the last 20, 30 years is pretty much the same stuff, the same way, just a little faster, a little more efficiently, a little cheaper, move data around the company a bit better. But this is the first time we've truly had to look at making changes to our businesses to make them more effective and be more effective in this much more data-driven virtual world that we're living in today. How can we operate more effectively? Supply chains are going through the biggest change we've ever seen. How do they become more autonomous? How can we partner with the right organizations to get the data we need to be effective? And how do we deal with this widespread cloudification? So here's some data from the Fortune 1000 I thought I'd share, which is that we asked a number of leaderships within these organizations around, what are you trying to achieve today in terms of your goals as a business, and 53% have pretty much figured out what they got to do. They're just in one great big hurry to get there. They want to achieve what they're setting out to do as a business. They've got a plan. About a third still don't have a plan. I see some people nodding already, but they're still resetting. They're still trying to figure out how to move forward, what to do, how to be effective as an organization. And then a smaller number, 16%, wanted to snap back to 2019 and the world we came from. And some other data, we'll get into the study that we recently conducted on the state of data and quality within organizations, but we track the Global 2000 every 6 months, and this is 600 of them, and we asked decision makers within those organizations what is plaguing them today in terms of, what is holding them back in terms of meeting their strategic objectives. And number one is a lack of centralized data governance within the organization. There's a real issue with how do we not just structure this, but how do we improve the quality of our data to make ourselves move forward? If you're any type of executive today in a large organization in particular, your job is to manage data and to manage change and to affect it. And there's another issue with a lack of alignment. Organizationally, companies are rethinking how they're structured. What are the roles of the C-suite? What are the roles of managers today? How do you manage in a very virtual environment? The world is very different now. People don't want to go back into an office. Those days have gone. And how do you manage this effectively? How do you manage communication? How do you drive your people? How do you get commitment from the C-suite to drive these objectives? And how do you deal with a very fragmented systems landscape? So these are the things that are really plaguing companies today. And we can look at where companies are. We call this one office data cycle. We can look at where they are today in terms of how they're trying to evolve. And you talk to anybody in an executive role, and their whole job is to get data to win in their market, whether it's data on their competitors, whether it's data internally on their operations, whether it's understanding their macro environments, whether it's understanding how to predict customer behavior, customer demand, how to react to geopolitical crises that are going on. But most companies are probably around just trying to get the data to win in their market. But to get to that data, you've got to rethink your processes. Processes are performed in order to get to the data outcomes you need to be effective. And that's what I mentioned earlier. Many companies are only just going through the change now where they're having to make substantial rethinks to how they structure themselves, how they get data from A to B, how to get the information to survive and be effective in their market. How can they leverage technology to get there? And then once you've figured out how to redesign your processes, you've got to do it in the cloud. How do you do that effectively in the cloud? Using the right tools, the right hybrid technologies, the right capabilities to make that transition. And then when you've got that data in the cloud, running the way you kind of need it, you've got to think about how do you automate it effectively. Because automation isn't a strategy. If people think automation is a strategy, you're looking at this all wrong. It's a discipline. It's how do we think about how do we instill an automation mindset into our people so they can do their jobs more effectively. You know, once you've automated all the mundane stuff that could be automated, you should get promoted to the next level within your business. It's about looking at the grunt work, the work that goes into maybe getting the data, automating that as much as possible so you can spend more time and energy and focus interpreting that data, talking to data managers in other companies and figuring out how do we exchange data sets, how do we integrate more effectively, you know, what tools do we need to be effective to get there. And then we can look at AI, you know, looking at, you know, feedback loops, looking at, you know, computer vision and other types of tools to be effective because, you know, if you're in the retail space or the consumer goods space today, you know, you are not in business if you don't link into Amazon or Walmart systems anymore. You know, these are purely AI-driven systems today. So ultimately, data is your strategy, automation is your discipline, and AI refines that data on a continual basis. You're continually refining it, making your business more autonomous, making things work more seamlessly. And we can look at these different horizons that we've come through to get there. And Horizon 1 was what we call digital today. This was really how do we become more efficient and effective? How do we drive out technical debt for our enterprise? Horizon 2, where I believe we are today, is much more around this one-office growth mindset, which is about human and machine processes working in tandem. This is about eliminating people debt and process debt. So it's not just looking at fixing underlying technology mess. This is about figuring out how do we structure roles more effectively, people's jobs more effectively, processes more effectively, so we can actually get to the data we need into what we look at this next horizon we're emerging, and we call it one ecosystem. And this is about starting to partner with other businesses within your own sphere. So it could be within your industry, it could be in adjacent industries, where you can actually collaborate together to get common value from servicing your customer. Because today, your business may only service one segment of your customer life cycle, and you want to get broader than that. So we can look at many examples of how one ecosystem's been effective. For example, in the healthcare, pharmaceutical value chains, where you have regulators working with high street pharmaceutical retailers, working with biotechs, working with pharma. These are all businesses that can work together to form an ecosystem to be effective. And just looking at it into the broader scheme of things, you bring together your employees, your customers, and your partner experiences. You start to look at all the technological factors that are impacting the world we're in today. Web3, I think, is one of the most exciting advancements in developments in terms of decentralizing the web, starting to pool resources. When you think about the fact that social media has largely failed, it's not set out to do what we meant social media to do, the fact that the internet is controlled by Facebook, Amazon, Google, and Microsoft. The web isn't going the way that we meant it to go either. So we start to look at the impact of blockchain and Web3 as something that's really exciting. You talk about the metaverse, that we don't believe can be effective without a Web3 underpinning to make it truly effective. And then we look at all these other technological impacts to our business, which we've been talking about in terms of ubiquitous connectivity with 5G, autonomous processes, etc. But I think even more important are these people and culture factors, which is all around how do we build shared goals and incentives, not just to work with our own colleagues, but to work with partners within our ecosystem. How do we have more purpose-led stakeholder value creation? Why are people working for the business that we're in today? Do they believe in the mission? I mean, I was talking with a CIO just last week, and he said to me, I have a harder time selling my value proposition to my own staff than I do my customers. Right? It's getting harder and harder to drive purpose, and drive real, meaning to a business in this world we're in, and then rewarding skills and culture that drive this collaboration forward. So these are the technological and these are the cultural issues that are impacting businesses today. And we'll get into our study now, but I'll just leave you with one quote, which is one of the, if you listen to Astro Teller describing Google X, he said it was like Willy Wonka chocolate factory. It was really all about the people. Underneath the data, underneath the outcomes, underneath what they were trying to produce, it really was, everything is about the people ultimately, pulling together, collaborating to be truly effective in what they're doing. Okay, so I called forget the Great Resignation, forget all these other labels that we've given our era. I really call it a great hurry. We're moving fast. As I said, 53% of the Fortune 1000 are trying to propel themselves into the place they want to get to. They're moving very fast. We've seen cloud and security dominate spend. We're seeing connectivity technologies becoming, these are commonplace today. These aren't 5 years off in the future anymore, where you look at things like data process automation tools, process mining and task mining tools. Conversational AI is having a big impact on many businesses now. We see huge uptake in some of these AI products. And then edge technologies and these tools are becoming very effective. Successful executives are those who are handling two things and two real challenges to their business, which is how do you manage data, how do you manage change? And that's what everybody is grappling with right now. It's not just about getting data, it's how do we change with the data, how do we reorganize to get what we want, how do we train a lot of our people to be more effective. I spent some time with some big retraining of global organizations, and the metrics that these guys are looking at to retrain staff are crazy. I mean, one of them is looking at moving 700 people in one department, retraining 400 of them, moving them to another, and moving 300 people out of the business. And they were literally looking at how they were working with Microsoft Teams as the data. They weren't looking at traditional means anymore of evaluating talent. They were looking at how much people were using Teams every day and collaborating on that as their judgment for trainability of staff. So there's a lot of stuff going on right now. We're right at the cusp of the change that's happening. So let's talk about this global study we're doing. And then, Kevin, did you want to start off a bit with the big things that we learned from this?
Yeah, so I think the study, the key thing is it was C-level executives, Russell 2000 level people that we surveyed in here. And I think it was about 2,000 executives that we ended up doing. Phil and his team did the study. We helped with, they got some clients and we got them here. The results were pretty amazing, and we've used them all over the place for people to discuss. So what we learned, again, maybe it should have been obvious to everybody, but again, these are C-level executives that said, hey, data is critical to our success. right? So they reconfirmed that the data was critical to what they were doing. And they aren't ready to take advantage of those opportunities yet, which is, obviously a big problem that they need to work on. And basically the data investment in data is going to grow faster than IT investment over the next 5 years, which is, IT investment is expected to grow. Phil gave you all the factors that are driving that. And I think the fact that data investment is going to grow faster is important for all of us that are data professionals. The stat, and again, I try to repeat some of these stats all over the time because people have trouble absorbing them and then remembering and thinking of the implications. So 90% of the people in this survey said the data was critical, but only 5% said they had the data they needed. 5%. And data quality, for those of them that even had it, right, then you got to look at what the data quality is and what's important. 89% said that data quality was key to business success. I don't know what the other 11% were doing, but it's kind of obvious that data quality is important. And they also said that data knowledge and data health drives company performance, right? So if there was ever any question, I use the line all the time, every problem is a data problem, right? If I got an inventory problem, it's a data problem. If I got a working capital problem, it's a data problem, right? So I've got to get into the core of all the things that we're doing. And the combination of getting the data right and picking the right technologies to use those, can be a competitive advantage. And there's lots of examples, both on the negative side where, it's caused problems versus the positive side where it's been advantages for where people are. A great client, Lionel Mars at Friesland Campina. Friesland Campina is the largest milk producer in the world. And, he says basically embarking on digitization and fast-moving dynamic data, the possibilities of business value, added value through information and data are increasing. And they would tell you that, the key to speeding production and getting products out faster and getting them to market faster is all data and how they've organized and worked on data to be important. But yet Phil and I were just going through this again to remember that says, 75 to 80% of the executives claim their company are either world-class or mature in their data architecture. So, I don't know what the survey, what the standard they're using is, but that's an interesting stat. It says high, right? World-class architecture. But only 23% of them have consistent and policy-aligned data at scale. Right, that's I think a little bit of at least for me, was an eye-opener that it was that low for what they're trying to do. And the stat we pointed before, only 5% say their data is good enough for what they're trying to do, and 25%, even the ones that might think it's good enough, have low to moderate trust in their data. And I always say, trust. We always say people are. Phil and I were talking about the fact that, every 10 years we learn some of the same lessons again. And, we're back at let's dump everything into a data lake or a data ocean and it'll give us integration. And it doesn't. And all you get out of that is a data swamp, right? Out of that data lake. And that data swamp is a real problem. And I've seen multiple examples where CIOs have gotten replaced and even CEOs replaced because the board didn't trust the data, right, that they were getting. So what they do, they put a data lake in, and then they replace the next CEO, right, because that wasn't the problem. The problem was, I don't know where the data is, I don't trust the source, it's not governed, and we need to drive through there. So, Phil, did you want to add any points on the ones below?
Yeah, I think it's interesting how companies feel they've got the structure for the data correct, but it's the trust and the understanding of that data and the immediacy and how to drive outcomes. And I'd love to get some feedback from some of you folks on, you know, how is success measured within your organization in terms of data quality, in terms of what people are looking for. You know, I spent some time I was over at Novartis just before COVID happened, and they were putting everything into their data science. And it was just, they basically said, we've become a data company. We just can't get the talent fast enough to try and understand correlations between data sets across, you know, medical conditions and drug developments and things like that. So I think a lot of this is around people looking at data differently. And I think we heard about the chief data officer a few years ago, which I think was a fairly meaningless role, which is now becoming hugely significant in organizations. Now, who has got a chief data officer in their organization today? We have 1, 2. Who doesn't? Wow. Who has a consistent policy for managing data across their organization today that is robust? It's not, okay. So, I mean, looking back at some more of these findings, I think, you know, we're seeing, you know, we showed earlier that data is the #1 issue preventing companies from. So, do you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question on the previous slide.
Yep.
Yeah. What measures are the metrics that you have used to quantify those percentages, 75, 80%, 23%, 5%? So, just on certain measures, like you came up with those numbers, right? That, okay, where 100% of their data is good enough today. So, what is the definition of good? How did you quantify that? Like, okay, this is my success, I passed, that is a 5%.
Yeah, well, this was a very senior level study, so we were asking C-suite executives, you know, to give us on a sliding scale, you know, their level of confidence with, you know, how consistent their policy aligned strategy was. So you'd have inconsistent, consistent, very consistent, highly consistent, in terms of, you know, rate the quality of the data. So we're rating some opinions from leaders within organizations here from a high level. This isn't getting right down to the weeds of talking with database leaders and managers and things. So, okay. And investment priorities in data is now, you know, they're increasing rapidly, even more aggressively than IT. So many decisions are being made around how do we drive more impactful data for our organization, even more important than sometimes it's just spend more money on technology for technology's sake. I mean, what are you seeing there?
Yeah, so I think if you look at what Phil had up front and then you look at here on the right-hand side, right, you look at the digital, we like to say every, you know, digital transformation requires a data transformation. Right, because if you think if you're going to digitize things, what's the core of that? What connects it? The supply chain, whatever area you're trying to digitize, it's data. So the that's kind of the #1 area we see, followed quickly for us by M&A and divestitures. Right, you know, the biggest reason that M&A fails to get the synergies that they had. Once you get past the, you know, was it a good idea, which most people can figure out whether it's a good idea or not, is that the data didn't integrate and they didn't have clean enough data and they didn't figure out how to integrate it. Or you couldn't take it apart, right? So, you know, management comes to you and says, hey, I'm going to do a carve out of this business. Well, and you say, well, how are we going to do that, right? Because we use all the same common parts all over the place in the company and they're tied together. So figuring out how to separate that and make that #1 is there. I always say people who've done large transformations, whether they be ERP or just digitizing things, once they've done one, the first thing they start working on the second one is data, right? Because I've yet to have an executive tell me their data was too clean. Right? We got it too clean too early. from being able to do that. So I think that's a big piece. And again, I think that 80% of the people in the survey said it was either 1, 2, or 3 as the priority for an investment going forward. And whether that's I need to migrate data, or I need to separate data, or I need to have a big data cleanup effort, or I need to put some governance in place to be able to do it. Most governance programs fail largely because it requires organizational discussions about who does what, right? And so it's like, who adds the part number, who adds all the other fields, and that governance gets wrapped up in an organizational discussion. So down the line, lots of people add things to the data, and it gets confused when we're there. So this slide is to talk just a little bit, okay, so if I know I've got all these problems, right, what am I going to try to do? We tried to end here with a simple, if I had to go back and I had to do something simple when I go back tomorrow, right, what would I try to do, right? And the first thing I tell people all the time is not all your data is equal, right? You cannot treat it all the same. There's too much data in every company. So prioritize the data and look at it based on what drives the business results. What's the most important thing that you're working on, and what drives the business results? And when you drive that business result, then decide there. And you can do as simple as looking at what the KPIs that the company's using or the board's using, and then go back and look at the data there to try to look at what's there. The second thing is, don't look at it as tactical. Right? It's not like, okay, we're going to let the data people handle this, or we're going to let IT people handle it. From there, governance has to report high in the organization, and it has to be important. And I would tell you, the clients we work with that end up getting data right are people that make data a strategic priority and make it something that the CEO, that he or she reviews and pays attention to. A strategy and a roadmap is important. The old, if I don't know where I'm going, any way will get me there. So having the roadmap, now that I've got that priority, what's the roadmap I'm going to use to try to get there, and how I can't do it all at the same time. How am I going to do it? And then once I get that roadmap, how do I make it live, and how do I continue to add things? Because there's going to be new projects, new things that change it that you're going to try to drive. And again, sponsored by the CEO is important. And last thing is, the most effective companies in all of our surveys are basically ones that say, we have a center of excellence relative to data, right? So people have centers of excellence for a lot of things, but we have a data center of excellence. And people that focus on this as a profession and focus on this as super important and something that's going to drive the business going forward. So that data center of excellence is important, and they deal with, because we didn't even get to trying to monetize the data yet, or what outside data I need to have. One of my CDOs at one of the people that we work with, he said when he took over, they were buying $50 million a year in outside data. He said there was only, might be a good or a bad number, he said there's only one problem, was that 30 million of that, right, was buying the same data, right? We had duplicate data, people were buying it all over the company, and we had no single source of how to drive all that. So those are, in Kevin's simple, I can never remember more than 4 things, usually only 3 actually, so this is a bonus to have the 4th. Those are the 4 things that we'd focus. What would you add, Phil?
I would add, how do you build a career understanding the value of data? Because I think that's where there's been a lot of shifts, particularly this move to a virtual organization over the last couple of years has really driven the need for, one, understanding the outcomes that we need to be effective with our businesses, and 2, developing our skills to get there, because it's not like the days where you have to have a PhD in computer science or whatever to be effective now. A lot of these tools are very low code or even no code to be effective. People around you, how do you collaborate to be more effective on the job is something very important as well. And then working outside of your organization is so increasingly important as well, particularly in a data management role. The amount of people I talk to in these roles where they're having to figure out with data owners in other businesses, how do we share data in the right formats? How do we connect more effectively? How do we anticipate together? And that sort of thing too. So I just think we're right at the beginning of a whole new curve of understanding the value of data versus just IT and process, which are infrastructure layers, as we said earlier. The first era was fix basic IT problems. The era we're in now is we're fixing our people and our process issues to get to the data we need to get to this next era, which is really about the ecosystem we're working in and being truly effective with other businesses and ourselves. So. Got a bit of time if you've got any questions or
Questions,
comments?
anybody?
Yeah, I'm curious what you see in working with different organizations across different industries in terms of their willing investment into data infrastructure if they want to be a data-centered organization. Do you think it's maybe 5% of their general annual budget, 20%? What do you see?
I can.
Go ahead.
So what I'm seeing is companies looking a lot more at what they need and then thinking about whatever it costs. So it's not like the old days, and the old days we're talking like last year, year before, where it was, we spend $20 million a year on our IT budget, we'll increase it by 2 points. This is much more, what do we need to be effective and how do we get there and how quickly do we get there? And I don't think we're at that point where we're mature enough to start putting big budgets on these things. It's how critical is this data to be effective? Like if you're in a CPG company right now and you don't understand what's going on with global supply chains, you're in big, big trouble. There's a food crisis apparently about to hit the UK now because of certain things going on. There's other energy crises going on in the world. So I don't think that businesses are mature enough to start putting real numbers on this. A lot of this is we need this and we need this now. And I come from a lot of the SI world and services where we used to call this, people would buy our mess and they'd do it for less. It was a bit of a joke. So, we could outsource work and get it done cheaper. Now we just need help. We need partners to help us get there. So I think companies are in this immediacy of crying out for help, needing immediate needs, and then factor in this talent crunch that is real. This is a 3-4 year thing. This is very, very real for organizations where they're really struggling to get the people. I was seeing this stat about the Global 2000, 50% of the staff haven't even met each other yet. This is a unique situation we're in the world, and getting data to understand where we are, where we're going, and our own operations and businesses has been more important than ever. And all we can say is it's growing faster than IT, and I think it's going to dominate decisions more and more as we see companies address what's going on in the world. So.
I agree 100% with what Phil said. The only little pieces that I would add is we always say if you're doing a major transformation project, somewhere around 15 to 17% of your budget for the transformation project should be about data, right? Cleaning it up, organizing it, getting it going. So that doesn't give you your big number, but it gives you, if I'm working on a project for transformation, that's important. I think the second thing that is super important, and what we have helped some people do, and I see people do very effectively, is trying to put a business case on data quality. And people always say, well, how can you do that? It's hard. Well, the cost of bad data, right, is hard to quantify, but it can be done, right? And so spending some time to quantify that gives us another data point. So those are like two data points, and then Phil's right in that the strategic value of this is still coming out. Remember, 3 years ago, we used to say that data was an IT problem, right? It's a business problem today, and a huge business problem.
Yeah.
So I think we're probably part of that 11% that, what did you say, that said data quality is key to business success. Like, we're the other side of it. I think there's two ways you can do like data governance and data cleanup. It's the top down and bottom up.
Yeah.
So what do you do to try to get that buy-in at the executive level when you understand the just prolific data problems you have in implementing this? So what would be your suggested first step?
Well, let's see if I've been to your company. I'm just going to guess, right? The executives say, how bad could our data be? And then they follow that up with, we're shipping product or we're getting product out, so how bad could it be? The business is running, right? I think that's the challenge, right? That's the challenge, and it's a very common problem that people have, that they say what the idea, and again, there's no way you're going to do a complete data quality study and be able to, monitor. If you can find a couple areas of high impact that you can take to the executives and say, look at what this is doing for us, right? And look at what that cost of that data is that's trying to drive us. Or look at what the cost of, a lot of times people will try to say, what drives it home, one example I've seen numerous times over is people go to a customer and the customer says, tell me everything that you sell to me. And they give them a list, right? And they say, that list isn't right, right? That item's actually the same item 3 times, and you're missing these 2 other items. And when the executive, the VP of sales or whoever it is on that call, then he or she will run back to the office and say, how can our data be so bad that the customer knows the data better than we do? That starts to say, okay, well, now let's peel back the onion. Why is that true, right? Why is that the way it is? I wish I had a magic bullet for you, but it's not. And unfortunately, most people learn it the hard way, right? By having an embarrassing customer incident or multiple embarrassing incidents, or a quality issue that comes from having bad data, and that's what then gives them religion, right?
How can you be proactive compared to what you said is the reactive mode, right? Like the thing happens, people react to it. How can you be proactive from, is there any recommendation from your side with the bad data?
I think, there are a lot of companies out there that'll do a data assessment for you. And unfortunately for all of us, we always say, it's hard to be a prophet in your own land. So, it's true no matter what company you're in, right? It's hard for you to say, hey, my data's bad, look at it, you're right. People don't believe you. So sometimes you got to go get somebody else, right? A third party to help you, take a look at that. That's not an advertisement for us, because when I'm looking at bad data in my company, I usually want a third opinion too, because I, think my people are, routing the data, right, or wiring it to the answer they want, right? So it's good to have an independent view. There are things that you can do a data assessment. The other thing I suggest people is to always try to find a sample problem and then take that sample problem and, say, well, if we found this one or we found these 3, how many other ones can we done? Maybe we should do more of a comprehensive look, all right? And again, it's an education process. It's a constant education. One of my old mentors said to me a long time ago, I'm never wrong, I'm just often not convincing enough. And that's the problem that we have, right? We're just not convincing. We know that there's a problem there. We know data is causing the problem. We just got to figure out how to put it in the right light, in the right business context, and how to deliver it to people. Any other questions? We have 4 more minutes till cocktails.
Has this been useful?
So I got something that's kind of off topic a little bit.
Yeah.
The first person I've
It's really early. Right now we're looking at we're tracking 93 Web3 basically emerging businesses. Some of them were actual data businesses who've kind of reinvented themselves a bit. But I mean, it's just, you know, there's a huge fatigue going on with the way the internet's evolved with social media. I mean, we're at the point where Elon Musk is just trading up his Twitter to save himself another $10 billion or whatever he's doing. It's just become a joke. And also, I think there's a real desire from people to decentralize the internet. And we're seeing, obviously, Google and I think Microsoft, they're now investing in Web3. Obviously, it's defensive, but also they're looking at, you know, there's a common desire for the web to decentralize and to change. And so we can pool resources, we can build a really democratized one that's effective. I'm seeing some like really interesting things happening around like tokenization of talent, which is people becoming, because so many people with different skill sets now, and the way to go out and find talent using traditional methods is impossible. But if you have specific skills in programming languages or managing applications or processes, you can start to enter into blockchains of talent so people can access you and that sort of thing. So we're starting to see blockchain technologies at the core of a lot of different ways of thinking, and this is what's getting the longer term investors excited now, I think. Automation's been the hot thing for a long time, and it's sort of, it's now part of business. It's run its course a little bit. Now the big thinking is around how can we truly build the democratized web. And then you look even further out and you start to think, what's holding Web3 back and blockchain? It's energy and resourcing. But then look at quantum computing coming in on the horizon, which could completely transform computing infrastructure and the way we look at everything. So I think, you know, this is the start of a longer journey towards something that could be very, very real. When you start to see the big guys jump in, it gives me hope as well as gives me cynicism. But look at the investments going into quantum right now. It's quite impressive. So I would say keep an eye on it, keep close to it. Ping me privately. I'll send you this list of 93 companies we're tracking. And I just hired another analyst just to look at this stuff because it's hot, it's interesting, and there's real cases coming out. So.
Well, thank you. Thanks for coming to listen. Hopefully you got something out of it, and have a good rest of your day.